Welcome to the Lunch and Learn podcast from the National Fire Chiefs Council to share knowledge and lived experiences on topics about equality, diversity and inclusion. We hope to create a momentum of learning, and we ask you to share widely with your friends and colleagues. Today, Jackie Gavin, EDI advisor from Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue Service, led the discussion on trans visibility in the Fire and Rescue Service, increasing understanding how trans awareness can contribute to the Fire and Rescue Services meeting the needs of employees and communities.
I think the thing that I'm trying to do with this presentation today, and thank you, Kat, for that introduction. I mean, yes, today being Transgender Day of Visibility, but whilst it may be Transgender Day of Visibility, I think it's also important to recognise that for trans people, as Kat alluded to, that it's a lived experience that we all go through as trans people each and every single day. And what I want to try and do with this presentation is not try to dictate. I'm not trying to make it about those kind of things. I just want it to be about a little bit about my lived experience. There will be a little bit of a quiz in this presentation, and I just want to make it as open and as transparent. There will be things that I will say that some people may find that some of the language that I have on here may see as derogatory, but please see the kind of language that I'm using is in the context of what we're talking about why our trans lives and why trans lives matter. So just a little bit of details about what we'll be talking about today. So I'll do a little bit of an introduction for those that you don't know me, who I am, looking at what do you call a trans person, a little bit of the legal bit, which I know can be a little bit boring, but I think it's just as important that we remind ourselves a little bit of the journey where we've come from. Also then a little bit of a quiz, and then a little bit moving on to my story, of which, as I say, I'll be as open and as transparent as I can. And then the final bit being very much around questions to the floor. And because of my openness and my transparency, I would actively encourage you to ask the one kind of question that you may feel that you never ever want to ask. But that's the reasons why we probably still face the barriers we do, because people are frightened to talk about it, or as I talk about it, very much talk about it with the volume turned down. Stop that right now. Turn the volume up. Let's get those questions out there. Be prepared to say what you need to say. And as I say, I will do my best to answer it. If I can't answer, or if I don't feel comfortable about answering it, I'll just say I don't feel comfortable about that. Or if I don't have the answer, I'll say, look, I don't know that, but you know what? I will go away and find out where I can. So my name's Jackie Gavin. I am the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Advisor with Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue Service, where I've been with the organisation for just over 18 months. A journey that I'm incredibly proud to have been a part of, so much so that sadly I will be leaving in a short period of time, going over to the private sector. But I have said that even though I may be leaving, I want to make sure that this kind of conversations across the wider NFCC are continually talked about. My career before joining the Fire and Rescue Service was very much within the civil service, where I delivered trans inclusion for about 12 years right across the Whitehall estate, to allow me to be able to really make that difference needed in ensuring that the voice of trans was heard. This has allowed me to be recognised for several leading awards, including getting honour from the Queen last year in her birthday honours list, which has left me feeling incredibly humble, because when I talk about trans inclusion and try to make a difference in trans inclusion, I do it because it's the right thing to do. I don't do it about the recompense. It's about simply doing the right thing. So moving on, what do you call a trans person? As I say, this part of the question, I must say, comes with the bit of the health warning, where there will be words that people may find derogatory and challenging. But the kind of things that I often hear when people talk about trans people, some of the words I hear include things like describing people chicks with dicks. I hear people talking about the word tranny. I hear people talking about the word brick, although that's more of an Americanism. I hear them talking about the word poofter. I hear them talking about the word dead name. Dead name, for those of you that don't know, is the name of the individual, what they had or they were given at their birth, and using that kind of wording. I hear people talking about things like dick girl. I hear people talking about things like dolls with balls. But ultimately, the name that I prefer, thank you very much, is simply Jackie. A little bit about the legal bit. It's hard to believe that it was only just 22 years ago when the first parts of legislation in the UK that recognised the voice of trans people, and that came in the form of the gender reassignment regs that were updated as part of the Sex Discrimination Act, just 22 years ago. For those of us that were around at the time, we felt it was just a bit of a holding block because we know that there was more and more conversations going on. We wanted to make sure that we had those kind of things because there was a lot more court cases starting to end up going to the European Court of Human Rights. At a similar time in 1999, it wasn't long after a change of administration and a change of government, which allowed us to be able to start to see the positive changes needed within that space. That eventually led on to the Gender Recognition Act of 2004, which allowed for some people to be recognised as their newly affirmed gender. I say some people because it was very much applied to those people who are in the binary trans place, i.e. those going from male to female or female to male. And also there was a set sort of stipulation that people had to go through and had to go through like a panel discussion, and still do in some ways, to be able to get a newly affirmed birth certificate in that of their newly affirmed gender. The Gender Recognition Act also made it against the law to ask someone's GRC and employment best practices to treat men and women respectively, how individuals are living in their gender identity regardless of whether they are known to possess a GRC. There's no obligation on the individual to inform others if they have a GRC or not. Government is constantly being bombarded in various different conversations, and we know that in 2015 there was a huge piece of consultation work carried out by the Government Equalities Office to carry out a review of the Act. But we also know that last year the Government Equalities Minister, Liz Truss, made the decision not necessarily to make a lot of the changes that came out of the recommendations. And as I've put there, we will wait to see how the carrying on consultation goes on in that space. Following the Gender Recognition Act, we know that many parts of equality legislation came under one umbrella, and that umbrella being the Equality Act, which we know is the legally protects people from discrimination in the workplace and in the wider society across a series of characteristics. I'm sure you all know what those protected characteristics, but just as a reminder, these are age, these are disability, marriage and civil partnerships, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion and or belief, sex, sexual orientation, and of course, gender reassignment. The Act itself says under section 13 and 19 of the Act, which prohibits direct or indirect discrimination against a person as a consequence of a protected characteristic, including obviously that of the protected characteristic of gender reassignment. It does sometimes get a little bit confusing because at the moment it's very much around if the person is proposing to undergo, is undergoing or has undergone a process or part process for the purpose of reassigning the person's sex by changing physiological or other attributes of sex. Sex very much being in the binary, male to female, although last year, if you didn't know it, JLR were taken to tribunal by a non-binary individual who then argued that they had been discriminated because of who they are and because of their non-binary status. The judge made a ruling that that person had been discriminated and therefore the individual was awarded. So there is still a little bit of debate around that wider aspect, but we know that the Law Society has also been asked to look at the wider description of characteristics, and who knows, we may actually see something which will allow for that incorporation of non-binary identities. There's a little bit more details to what the Act also goes on to talk about being unlawful for an employer to discriminate against an employee, job applicant or contractor on the grounds of that person's sex or gender identity, and so on and so forth. Question: with the exception of gender reassignment, which one of the protected characteristics applies to trans people? I'll give you the answer, because simply they all do. Because believe it or not, trans people come from all walks of life. Let's be honest, we're all growing older. We're all got our own sexual orientation. We've all want or may not want to get married, and so on and so forth. So you don't need to necessarily answer these questions, but if you wish to have a go at them, feel free to. My first question to you is, how do you choose what gender you are? Is how did you choose your name? Is have you ever had surgery? Did it hurt? If not, do you think it might hurt? Ask someone you don't know how they know what gender you are, and write down your answer. Why did you choose to be cis, i.e. non-trans? Does your body feel or look natural? And would you mind if I was to have a touch or look at it? Are you sure you're not just a drag king or a drag queen? Are you sure that you're not or you are gay? What do I call you? Do you think you'll ever go back to how you were before? What did you look like before? And can you please show me a picture? What toilet do you use? And when was your last period, of course? You don't sound like you should and the person you say you are. Using your voice only, can you please say something that will mean that I might be able to believe that you are who you say you are? But the simple point of why I've done those kind of questions is to welcome you to the world and the feelings of what it feels like to be a trans person and the microaggressions that I and other trans people might have to go through each and every day as we have to try and explain ourselves, especially when we talked about the voice aspect. I know that my voice is slightly deeper and slightly more gravelly, and the amount of times that I pick up the phone call to some complete stranger and I get, is that Mrs. Gavin? Yes. Oh, or if it's not that, it's a case of, it's Mrs. Gavin there? Yes, speaking, and you can almost hear and feel the pregnant pause. It's a microaggression that makes me feel incredibly uncomfortable with all those kind of things. Allow me, if you will, to share a little bit of my story. As I've been promising people for a number of years now, my biography will be available in all booksellers and if not on Amazon through the usual channels once I've eventually written it, because as I say, I have been promising myself that I will write this for many, many years. But to give you a bit of an insight about what it means to me, I've always called myself and my story a Scot called Jackie. And I think when you look at the spelling Scot, it's fairly obvious. But to take you back a long time ago, I was born on the 4th of October 1967. I know I don't use a good moisturiser, but I'm the second of 4 children, born to my parents, Bill and Pat White. Born in the small market town of St Andrews in the Kingdom of Fife, in my native Scotland. Of course, if my dulcet tones don't already give it away, I am Scottish, but not proud enough to be a nationalist. But hey, anyway, we won't go down that path. It's not a political discussion. As a child, not that I remember, or even more as a baby, not that I remember, my mother would often describe me as a shy, loving, but couthy child. Couthy, there's a good Scottish word for you. It basically means cheeky. Some things never change on that front, and I'm proud to be that cheeky, authentic individual. By the time I get around to remembering times, particularly when I started primary school, and yes, I am in that photograph, I started to question things about why is it that boys have to wear one set of clothes and girls have to wear another set of clothes? Or why is it that girls have to go in one line and boys have to go in another line? Or boys have to make things with wood and a nail and a hammer, and girls have to make things with nice, soft, woolly type things. It was probably at that time I should have realised I would have ended up doing the role that I do within equality, diversity and inclusion, because I challenged absolutely everything. But in a world of 1970s Scotland, it probably wasn't the wisest of things, because the teachers often tried to find a way to keep me quiet by just trying to keep me suppressed and not asking those kind of questions. It led me to becoming more and more of a recluse. I ended up spending more time on my own as a young child. By the time I start to really getting to remember a thing was probably the wake-up call that made me realise that there was something about me that was slightly different. I remember the day quite well. It was a day in late October 1976, not long after my 9th birthday. It had been pouring with rain in Scotland, so it had been like that. In October, it wasn't quite like that. So for me, as I say, being a Sunday in late October, Mum and Dad had fallen asleep in their chairs after the big Sunday lunch that we always used to traditionally get on a Sunday. My big brother was reading the sports pages of the Scottish Sunday Post about his favourite football team having won the Scottish League Cup, 2-1 to Aberdeen. Baby Rob with the winner after extra time. My little brother was reading the same newspaper, but this time he was reading the comic strips of Oor Wullie and the Bruins, well-known comic strip in Scotland. My sister, who was 18 months old at the time, was finally asleep. She was in her terrible twos, we'll give her that, but after a screaming tirade of what felt like a lifetime, she'd finally fallen asleep. I, however, was sat at the dining room table, flicking between the pages of a magazine. I didn't know it at the time, but I'm dyslexic. As I flicked through the pages, pictures said 1,000 words, whereas something with words just made the words jump around and I didn't fully understand it. But pictures, they spoke to me so well. And as I flicked, I came across one particular image. And what puzzled me about it, first of all, it was black and white and all the rest of the pictures were colour. How did that happen? How were they able to do that? But secondly, the man who was in the photograph was sitting in what I would later come to know as the Christy Keeler pose. And if you don't know what the Christy Keeler pose, it's basically where somebody doesn't wear any clothes and they have the back of a chair up against them. But again, that's not what attracted me to the photograph. What attracted me to the photograph was the fact that the gentleman was sitting in that picture and he wasn't smiling. Now, whenever we're children, we're taught whenever we go into a photo or going to appear in a photograph, we have to say that magic word of cheese or watch the birdie. But he didn't look particularly happy. As I think back to the time and also have that message vision in my mind's eye, I think back to the time when I turned over that page to reveal the next image. I have what I can only describe the sound of 1,000 cannons going off in my mind as I think back to that time, as the page begins to fall and to reveal the next image. Every second as it falls feels like a minute, every minute feels like an hour. And as the image starts to come through, it's the image of the same man in the same pose, but this time he's ripping his skin off to reveal that, not what you're thinking right now, but to reveal that of a beautiful lady. The long flowing locks, the perfect makeup, the smooth skin. Suddenly, before we know it, I'm running around our house like a loon. Again, I get another good Scottish word, let's call it an idiot. Screaming at the top of my voice, that's what I've been feeling, that's what I've been missing. Of course, my brothers are frightened and they're up against the wall and wondering what's happening. My mother and father wake up with a start and yes, my sister was wide awake again, crying and screaming at the top of her voice. But eventually, the household came to a nice, calm, quiet place. As it came to that calm, quiet place, with the exception of my snivelling, my mother tries to tell me that it's trick. My dad tells me it's not real. But to me, it is very real as I'm ripping at my skin, pulling it, trying to find the way to let that female exterior out of me, to become the real person that I knew that I needed to be. As I eventually calmed down, I couldn't get rid of that image. So eventually, my mother took me along to the doctor, the good old Dr. Briggs in the village surgery. Dr. Briggs sat me down and asked me to talk through what I was feeling. As I talked through, he tried again to tell me that it wasn't real. It was a trick. Trick photography happens all the time, he says, but I feel it's real and I keep on carrying on. By this time, my neck is red raw. Eventually, that led me to be assigned to him, that allowed the doctor to assign me to go to the hospital to go and see a special doctor to get him to talk to me about it. That meant a good thing. For 6 weeks, as I was going back and forward to the hospital, first of all, I got the whole day off from school, result. But one of those days when I was actually away attending the hospital, my big brother got asked by some of my friends, "Where's Scott?" Because that was my male name in those days. "Oh, he's gone to hospital." "Why has he gone to hospital?" "Oh, he's gone to get the girl taken out of him." That innocent comment by my brother meant for the next 6 years, I was kicked, I was punched, I was bullied, I was name called. But enough about the teachers. The kids themselves were just as bad. They would occasionally change the attire that I would be wearing to school to that of more female attire. But it meant that I had become a target. As I carried on going back and forward to the hospital, of course, my parents got to find out about this and the way things I was experiencing at school, and were so worried. They really wanted the doctors to do something about it. So the advice from the doctor was, get him to do more boy-type sports. Get him to do more than normal sort of thing, climb trees, etc., etc. You'll forget all about it. And to stop that bullying, I did hid it. I hid it because of the way I was feeling, the way I was being treated. I would play sport very well. Became a member of the Boys Brigade, well, because Dad was the captain of the Boys Brigade company. I joined the Air Training Corps because, well, Dad was the commanding officer of the Air Training Corps squadron. But as well as that, Dad was also the manager of the local football team. So I had to play football, and I thought, you know what, becoming a part of the football team would allow me just to forget about it, because if people were reliant on me, then I would be able to get less bullying because I would be a part of the team. And to an extent, that did happen. And I played football incredibly well. I went on to represent my school. I went on to represent my Boys Brigade company, my Air Training Corps squadron. I went on to represent the country, the best country in the world. That's just Scotland, just in case you're wondering. One of the times when I was playing, there was a young football manager came to see me play because he'd heard all about how good a player I was. I was a good goalkeeper, better than many goalkeepers out there. But anyway, as one of the games when I was playing, this manager was there and he saw me save 2 penalties, a free kick, and many other shots on goals where the team actually won because of my performance in that game. So impressed was this young manager that he came straight down to the changing rooms at the end, had a conversation with my dad, then brought me and said, "Look, I want you to sign a schoolboy signing for Aberdeen." That manager, in case you're wondering, was some guy called Alex Ferguson, I suppose. Sorry, Sir Alex Ferguson. He didn't have a knighthood then, but it's when he managed a decent football team. Not that there's anything wrong with Manchester United for those Man United fans in the audience, but when Fergie managed a decent football team. But Fergie got to find out about my secret, and just 2 months later, I was called to his office along with my dad, and I had my schoolboy contract ripped up by Fergie there and then. And the words of Fergie ring true in my mind today as much as they did when I heard them at the first time, which basically said, "No young lad will ever play for Aberdeen Football Club as long as I'm manager." Ashamed and frightened, I ran away from home at the tender age of 15 to the place where the streets are paved with gold. That was London back in 1983, because, well, it was the time of the yuppie. I was making £300 a week, £2.50 a week for digs. Bargain. But again, life can be cruel sometimes. And sadly, just after that period of time of about 3 to 4 months, on one of my regular phone calls back to my mother, I got to hear that Mum had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Also at the same time, Mum and Dad were splitting up. So I returned home to do my bit, to finish my schooling, and to try and make sure I could do something else that could really provide that level of support particularly for my little brother and little sister. After finishing my schooling, I ended up joining the Royal Air Force as a young officer cadet. Going through my basic training, managing to be able to bury that secret of me right down, not being able to tell anybody until just towards the end of my training, when I fell off the scramble net, smashed my kneecap, and before I knew it, I was being rushed into Cambridge Military Hospital down in Aldershot. Apparently, at the same time as being rushed into the hospital, I was shouting at the top of my voice, "I don't want to be a boy, I want to be a girl." Not a good idea in the military in the mid-1980s, I can tell you that for nothing. Before I knew it, I was being told that I was being put on a charge that would potentially have a prison sentence, because being LGBT back in the mid-1980s did carry that kind of sentence, which could also be then taken to Civvy Street. However, I managed, because I was in basic training, I managed to buy my way out of the military and say, I can't do this. I've got to become the real me. Running away from home, running back to home rather, I came back to a broken household, feeling that I'd let everybody down. But my mother said to me, no, now is the time that you have got to go and be you. Now is the time you've got to be yourself. So I left home again, making my home up in Aberdeen, working for post office counters. Getting that job with post office counters was perhaps one of the best things I was ever able to do, because working with them, they were able to do one of the first ever policies about transitioning in the workplace to really, really support trans people. At the same time as going through my transition process with them, one day I was walking down the main street in Aberdeen, which is Union Street for those of you that don't know it, and a car stopped to the side of the road rather, and said, I want to take some, and the driver got out and said, I want to take some photographs of you. I was like, why do you want to take some photographs of me? I really want to take some photographs of you because I think you'd be really good in some pictures. Before I knew it, I was being offered the opportunity to model for leading groups such as the Clarence Group. I was also being offered contracts to be able to model for Dorothy Perkins. Not a bad change. Going through that process allowed me to be me. I finally felt I was able to be my true self, my authentic self, and my real self. I even got married to my ex-husband. We felt that we had reached a point where we were able to be true to ourselves and open and honest. That was until the day after we returned back, as we were met by a barrage of flashbulbs at Gatwick Airport and a series of headlines, including the ones that you can see on the screen. Horrible, broken, downgraded. I felt, again, I'd let myself down. Being a part of the press, I felt I couldn't escape. I knew I couldn't escape. I began that period of time, what I call a patchwork quilt, of going from job to job to job to job. I just felt I could never settle. I was getting overlooked for promotion. Nobody knew what it was to be me, and I was just being degraded. I looked and I hunted high and low to be true to myself, but even then I couldn't be true to myself. This led me to be in a really, really difficult place until I eventually, in 2009, joined the civil service. Joining the civil service was an eye-opener for me. First and foremost, I took a step back on my career, right back to the beginning of a career. But also at the same time as joining the civil service, 2 weeks after that, I got a phone call from the then second perm sec of DWP of the organisation I was working for. And he said, again, I repeat, we know all about you. And I'm thinking, here we go again. I've got to explain myself again and again and again. But the words from Terry Moran came back saying, no, we may know all about you, but we need your help in making the organisation more inclusive. Since then, I've gone on to move on. I didn't realise that at the time, but after I split with my ex-husband, suddenly I was attracted to somebody else, and I'm now very happy in a relationship with my partner, Isabel, feeling proud, feeling able to be that authentic self, an authenticity that I feel that I'm able to take through in all my life, in everything that I do. And creating that kind of culture is so, so important. It's why what I do in the fire and rescue service is so important that we embed a culture of inclusion for everybody to feel that they can be authentic so that they can all succeed and drive forward in who they are. I live with mantras, and some of my favourite quotes include this one by Winston Churchill, which: we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. That's what we need to create here across our wider service, not just in Cambridgeshire Fire and Rescue Service, but in all services, so that everybody and anyone who's trans, whatever that trans actually means, whether it be somebody that's going to go through the physical aspect of going from A to Z or from Z to A, or even in the non-binary space, that will allow us to be able to really be able to shout from the rooftops, because, as we've seen in the latest HMI report, that is a key part of who we are as an organisation going forward. I'm going to finalise say this is your opportunity to ask the question that you felt you could never ask, and feel free to ask absolutely anything you want. Here endeth my lesson.
I think it's fair to say, you absolutely epitomise everything that we strive for within the Fire and Rescue Service, and that is to be honest, be proud, and to be ourselves. I often say the only thing that should be uniform in the Fire and Rescue Service is the one that we wear, because everything else should be about each of us being our own individual self, our own unique selves. And for that, we should be valued, and we certainly should be able to feel that value and to be able to shape our fire sector. So thank you so much. Over to yourselves. I mean, goodness me, like I said at the start, this is an inclusive, safe environment, and now's the time to ask those questions. So over to you.
Hello. I just wanted to say thank you, Jackie, for sharing your story, but also I've been in the fire service for nearly 5 years now, and how positive it is to actually see an event like this taking place. And I think the kind of the journey that as a wider fire sector we're going on, from 5 years ago, this probably never would have happened, and now we're in a position where we can have sessions like this and quite openly talk about it, and there be consultation documents about what we're going to do from a national level on improving visibility for not just LGB but also for T as well.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Hi, Jackie.
Hello.
I have been doing equality, diversity and inclusion for a long time, I think for a long time. And it's really hard to change cultures and behaviours and attitudes, and, where particularly when you're in organisations where there's, perceptions and sometimes cultural beliefs or, their own beliefs. And I just wondered how the Fire and Rescue Service can become more inclusive. You're in the fire service, and what things can we do to start breaking those barriers and start taking individuals as who they are, rather than looking at labels and segregating people into boxes?
So for me, I often talk about turning the volume up. As I say, let's just get the volume turned up and not be frightened about it. I mean, I still remember when I first joined the civil service, we would talk about diversity. So we're here to talk about disability. We're here to talk about race. We're here to talk. It's like, what did you actually say? Just say the word. It's transgender. Say it, not be frightened of it, and then embrace it in that kind of context. That will make such a big difference. I think we've also, and I know there are colleagues from CAMS on the phone, or this group, and they will often hear me talk about the feel. How do we really make it about how we get people to really feel engaged with the organisation? Because yes, as Kat said, it's yes about the badge, and there is that huge sense of pride about wearing the badge, but let's get it much more than that. Let's get it about so that when people see a fire engine going down the street, they simply see the fire service. They don't see CAMS, they don't see Derbyshire, they don't see wherever. They just simply see the fire service. So it's about just normalising that and making people feel that sort of sense of pride that they feel when they're on that pump driving down the main street, that they feel that same sense of pride by bringing their authentic self and having conversations about it in a way that we're doing right now, in a culture that allows for people to be more authentic across the mess deck and not be frightened about who they are and hide that part of themselves. Let's just get those conversations out there. Again, Cam's colleagues will know, before I joined the service, I was more than happy to have my message out there so that people knew all about me. And because I know personally for me, you put my name in Google and it's like everything comes back. But I don't want to hide. I just want to be honest and open and transparent with people. And that's the same, whether it be people from a trans perspective or people from any other background. They just want to be authentic. And if we can create that authenticity through the cultures that we're trying to empower across all our organisations and across our whole sector, that will be a massive, massive win for us.
So I'm one of Jackie's loyal lieutenants from Cambridgeshire. Jackie, we've had this conversation a lot of times, so I just think it'd be really useful to have it again in a wider form about where you think it really starts. Where do we have to start to plant this seed? Does it all fall to the EDI advisor, or does it sit somewhere else in the organisation? Where do we need to see the cultural change to really embed what we're trying to achieve?
I don't think it sits with just the EDI advisor. I mean, I think it's much wider than that. I mean, we've got leaders on this call, and I know that, when I say leaders, I'm talking about every single person. Doesn't matter what's on your shoulder or what's not on your shoulder. It needs everybody, but certainly it helps to have that leadership sort of conversation happening at that kind of level to allow it to filter to that right throughout the organisation. We know that sometimes it doesn't get all the way through, and we know that sometimes it gets stuck in what I call the permafrost, because it stops the information, because we know that for most of the younger generation, they get what it is to be authentic and be yourself, and they don't understand anything other than that. And that permafrost layer stops, or call it the glass ceiling, if you will, needs to be broken. I see my role as the Equality and Inclusion Advisor is to help break down that barrier, help break down those conversations, empowering people to be themselves. But each and every one of us on this call are equally as important in that breaking down that barriers. But certainly, I think it starts from the top. If it's felt from the top, right throughout the organisation, then you can't help but feel everybody else needs to get on side with it. And it's not just about doing it on days like this. It needs to happen every single day of the year, because today, yes, is Transgender Day of Visibility, and I'm out there and visible on Transgender Day of Visibility, but I'm also visible on my birthday. I'm also visible on 31st of July or whatever other day, because I live this way each and every day. So we've got to encourage that kind of conversation right across the organisation each and every single day, from the chief all the way throughout.
Absolutely, yeah. And just to reiterate, I think it does. You need that leadership, you need the direction, but I think it starts with it starts with oneself, doesn't it? To actually say on that day that you're going to you're going to make a difference. You're going to really live the values of what inclusion truly means.
Thanks, Catherine. Hi, everyone. And thanks, Jackie, for your story. It was fascinating. And actually, the discussion so far has kind of answered my first question. So I've tailored it a little bit to continue the conversation. So as one of those allies and senior leaders in the organisation, so I'm from Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire and Rescue, I'm after a little bit of advice, really, I suppose. So I'll frame it in a question. So what would be the headline topics that you'd advise me to start conversations in the organisation, and the ones that would make the most impact? So if there are 3 areas that I could sit and talk to people about that would make the most impact, what would you suggest would be the starting point with that? I'm tapping into your expertise and your experience to really gain that insight.
The one thing that I would love to see is to have all of us, regardless of who we are, some sort of objective that really, really highlights what it is that we need to be doing within the wider inclusion space. If we can have that kind of thing, because if I think back to the civil service, and again, colleagues will know that I've had this conversation before, every single PermSec, and PermSec, for those of you that don't know, is like the equivalent of the chief of government departments. that they have to publish each of their objectives each and every year on the .gov.uk website. So maybe it's about having that similar sort of aspect, about maybe saying to each of the chiefs, and sorry for all the chiefs on the call, but having that where they actually publish something like that and saying, right, for the next 12 months, these are what my objectives are, of which one of those objectives could be around the inclusion initiative. Because, as I say, we've seen it in the report, that diversity and inclusion is certainly going to be more and more of a priority. And those of you that have gone through the HMI so far will know that there is more and more of that kind of thing going forward. So I think that would be my number one. Let's get some sort of objectives in that space. And if it means that that is a wider objective that the chief then needs to take to their deputy chief, their area commanders, their group commanders, and so on and so forth, then let's get that happening right throughout the organisation so that it flows that kind of way, because that will be the difference. Because at the moment it feels, going back to what Paul was almost like saying, it's always falling on the shoulders of the EDI and I advisor. I don't have all the answers, I really don't, but collectively we can really make a big difference. Does that answer your question at all, Jason?
That's definitely a start for 10 and 1. I'll take away. Thanks.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you sort of half answered it in the last part, Jackie. This is a great day and it's a good turnout. It's, as far as I'm concerned, in a fire service setting, this is historical for having somebody of your caliber to talk to us. The disappointing thing is I see the same faces from my own service and from across everywhere else. How do we hold our senior managers to account and require them? This is where they should be. I can talk to you, I can pick up the phone and talk to you. Paul is there, MRC, Gareth, the people I work with. I know what we're talking about, and when I'm done, I can talk to people face to face. This is a one-off occasion. It's not going to be repeated again. So where are all those senior fire service officers that should be receiving this? And I think you half answered it anyhow. Just how do we tie them down and make them accountable? They answer to us as much as, forget the rank, I hold my chief, he's responsible for me. So I'll require him to come and listen and sit to this. And I want everybody else in the country to be the same. This got to come from them.
I won't say get a rope and find a way of tying them down, but I think, I mean, Faye, it would be remiss of me not to say things about obviously what is happening in the wider NFCC EDI and I project. There is a lot of good stuff coming out of that project. I think we know that, and certainly that's happening. We're also seeing things happen in the regions. So obviously within CAMS, we're part of the Eastern region. The 6 EDI and I advisors get together about once bi-monthly to talk about those kind of conversations so that we can create that platform. And again, I know NFCC colleagues will probably be fed up of hearing me saying this kind of thing, but we need to be more consistent across the piece in really making things happen, because we know that some of the services do the whole initiatives around this kind of thing or the wider EDI and I agenda really well. We know some could do better, and there's some in that sort of middle ground. And I think what we've almost got to do is literally say, right, let's take a stock check of where we are. From that stock check, we need something from across every single service that says, right, where are you? It could be a benchmark exercise such as, I don't know, and I'm name dropping here, what the E&EI tide or whatever it may be, that really allows us to see where as a sector we are. And then from there, we can build that better. We did exactly the same in the civil service to say, because we had government departments saying, this is our EDI and I strategy, but we're not going to share it with anybody. We need to get to that point where we are collaborative in that space to really make it go forward. And then from there, that will allow us to have that benchmark to say, right, okay, yes, we've got the HMI, but does that really give us what we want? No, let's get more under the skin to really build the difference and hold the chiefs to account and the whole of the organisation. So it's not just on these shoulders, it's the wider aspect of the sector.
I think it's the first time that I've had a EDI soapbox for about 25 years, 22 of those in the fire service. And do you know what? I'm quite happy if the HMI has been a little bit of a driver. I've lived through several iterations of equality frameworks over the years and not seen much change, but it is genuinely the first time that I've seen the National Fire Chiefs, and I will say the chiefs, sit there and go, EDI is a priority. It's great we've got the HMI document, but that's not good enough for us. It's the first time I've been involved with conversations where we haven't said, and I will say your Cambridgeshires, your Lancashires, the ones that are the front runners, that's great, but we're only as good as the service that's on the, if there's a service on the starting blocks. It's our collective responsibility as a sector to pick them up and help them. It isn't about who's first over the line. This is about all us getting over the line together. And I would say I've genuinely not been this hopeful for probably 22 years in the service, because I've never seen so many, and you are right, we're all right, we're all leaders at all levels, but so many chiefs signing up and going, no, do you know what, I want to be involved with EDI because that HMI report needs sorting out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tie up those chiefs, whatever we need to do to keep it going. But like I said, we've got to keep the momentum going for sure.
Thanks, Jackie. It's actually Debbie, but our IT strategy means we have to have our full name on. So ironically, I'm being called something that I haven't been answered to since my mother died nearly 20 years ago. So it's Debbie Yates from Lincolnshire. And as a member of the senior leadership team in Lincolnshire, we are trying to drive equality and inclusion throughout the service. Today's been a fantastic opportunity for me and others, I think, to learn, Jackie, because one of the areas that we're sadly lacking in is education in terms of knowledge and understanding of the issues facing members of our workforce and members of our community. I've been passionate about EDI many, many years. I've worked in private industry, the police for 11 years before joining Fire and Rescue 15 years ago. But one area that I'm ashamed to say is that I knew very little about was initially LGB in terms of getting more of an understanding in that, and then more recently in terms of trans. And if it hadn't been for a very, very brave firefighter to leave us as a male on-call firefighter and to apply to rejoin to us last year as a female whole-time firefighter, I personally and my colleagues would not have learned the little knowledge that we have to date. And it's through Laurel in our service who's really helped us understand the issues that she faces, what she wants from us. What I want to try and do is to ensure that I am never so reliant on an individual firefighter again in terms of having to ask those questions. How do we help her? What do we need? How do we talk to her colleagues? Do we need to talk to her colleagues? All of those questions that I came from a 0 base, and now I'm about to, I would say 1.5 out of 10. So there's still a significant gap of education that we need. And I think these sessions help. And yes, I'll take this back to my colleagues who are involved in other staff engagement today, which is why I'm representing Lincolnshire. I'm not EDI. We don't have one because we're a county service who don't have an EDI department or an advisor. So we're wallowing through on our own, but with significant help from Nikki and the team from NFCC. But I think that for me is the important thing, is where and how do we as individuals get the education, and how do we ensure that one of our objectives for our next year through our values and service plan is for people to be able to feel to be who they want to be at work, no matter what their background. And I think it's an objective for us, but we need a lot of help to actually get there.
I think it's important that that we all help each other. And again, I know NFCC colleagues will ask me to remind you, but yes, certainly the NFCC toolkit. And I think the more we can do these kind of sessions as well, if Paul gets his collection off the ground, you never know. I might be persuaded to come have that kind of conversation on a regular basis. Because again, I think, yes, I'm prepared to put my head above the parapet, but we need to create the culture that means that Laurel, whoever puts their head above the parapet and says, This is who I am. This is my authenticity. And once we've got that culture right, that makes such a big, big difference.
Rob from Warwickshire here. I think Debbie has kind of just asked the same sort of thing I was going to ask. And we're just looking at educating and retraining our service. And I just wondered, in your experience, what's the best way of doing it?
Earlier on this last year, we did something around obviously what happened with the Black Lives Matter movement and that issue that people were facing. I think we need to do more like this. So listening sessions matter massively, and creating that safe space where, like what we're doing right now, talking about it, getting it out there on the table and not being frightened about it with the volume, as I call it, turned up. So I think that probably is so important, and allowing for people to say what they really, really feel in a safe environment, because I'm not here to shut down people, because I know there will be people who don't fully understand or may not want to understand, but come to my side of the table, walk a mile in my shoes and understand what it's to be me will help build those bridges and build the difference that we need to do without me taking offence, because as I always say it, the only stupid question is the question you don't ask. Let's get in that place where we're prepared to do that kind of stuff as well.
And I know that Wayne Brown did a very similar session in West Mids in his service not long after the Black Lives Matters movement, just exactly that, to open up the conversation. And probably the way that we have that virtual contact with people now is that opportunity to do it. But I also know that one bit that Faye's put in there is around the NFCC are looking to host these, and they will of course be open to, as we said, not just the same faces, to people across our wider organisations.
Of course, a massive thank you, Jackie, for your involvement in the EDI project. It will be a massive loss, and we may well take you up on your offer to occasionally give us a hand with some stuff. But I suppose I just wanted to reiterate the EDI project. I think how we're trying to do things differently to how things may have been done in the past, and I can't talk from a place of experience, I'm afraid. This isn't my area of expertise, but it's very much about, although we want to produce best practice and tools around EDI for services to use, it's about pushing that out and driving it and building networks and upskilling everyone in how to approach the subject, how to deal with it in all of their own jobs. And that is absolutely key, rather than keeping it closed to a sort of smaller group of EDI practitioners. But really, I think you've kind of covered what I was going to say, and just watch this space. If you want, I'll just pop a link to where we host our products, and there'll be more and more coming out. So do keep an eye on that. And if you want to get involved in any of the work, then Penny's project managing it, and she's the go-to person for that.
Penny's just popped a note in there to say that any other lunch and learn sessions that you feel would be beneficial, then contact Penny and we'll see what we can organise. Thank you to all of you that have joined, but don't mind me just saying the biggest thank you to Jackie, again, not only for today, but just for everything that you have done to support the fire sector and to support the NFCC and many of us, absolutely privileged to have met you and to know you. And thank you again for today. It's been amazing, and the feedback is incredible. Thank you for all of you as well for coming along. See you on the next Lunch and Learn.
I hope you have found this podcast informative and it has given you insight. All Lunch and Learn sessions are available at www.ukfrs.com.